Okay, welcome everybody. Prydan da, and good afternoon. This is part of a series of sessions we're leading on from our Community Buildings Hub at DTA Wales, which are all about how to make your community building the most energy efficient. And we have with us today Elfed Lewis, who's been kind of the help design most of all of those resources on our website under the Community Buildings Hub, and Elfed will be leading today's session on heating systems. And so we look forward to hearing from Elfed first, and then he'll lead us through some Q&A. But just to let you know that this is all linked with our EGIN programme, which at DTA Wales we run to help community groups in Wales to tackle climate change, become more sustainable through mentoring. So we those that sign up can get access to free mentoring and from people who have maybe done what you want to do and got the experience that they can share with you. And we also, there is, for those that go through our program, there's also an EGIN grant that people can get from the lottery for up to 15,000 to help people tackle the well, to kind of start and make some progress with the climate project that they want to do. And we also have our EGIN online community. I just like to remind people that you can go on to our EGIN online community called egin.community and sign up there and meet lots of other people who are interested in tackling climate change at the community level across Wales. And there's a community building section there which Elfed moderates, and feel free to put any questions you have about your building or thoughts that you might have there, and Elfed will read them and others will too, and hopefully we'll get a discussion going. But, so anyway, without further ado, I will pass over to Elfed. Thanks very much, Elfed.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. Diolch yn fawr. Just to introduce myself, I'm Elfed Lewis. As Matt already mentioned, I'm coordinating the Community Buildings Hub for DTA Wales and EGIN. I also do, I also go into community buildings and write energy reports. So I have seen all of the energy systems, the heating systems that I'm discussing today, live in action in community buildings. I'd also just note that there are, I've seen some fairly unusual heating systems in my time as well. And I'm not going to obviously go into every single type of heating system possible. I also work as a building energy efficiency consultant as well. And so, yeah, my background is in building energy use, how to reduce heat demand, and yeah, different technologies we can put into our community buildings to make them more energy efficient. I'll just start sharing my presentation. Okay, hopefully first page of my presentation is showing up for you. Yeah, as I already discussed, I'm going to cover the most popular heating systems in this session. There are other heating systems that I could have dealt with. One would possibly be biomass. I have seen biomass used in a few community buildings, but very rare, really. And it's becoming rarer. There's very few new biomass boilers going in these days. So I made the difficult decision not to include it in my presentation, but more than happy to maybe discuss it in the discussion period at the end if you have any specific questions about biomass. So the ones we see the most of really are gas and oil boilers, fossil fuel boilers. Typically, if a property is on mains gas, 80% of the times it'll be using mains gas as its main heating source. We'll also look at different types of electric heating, direct electric and storage heaters. Now, there are many sort of sub-types of electric heating that we, again, could have discussed. One would be electric boilers, which in most cases look very similar to direct electric, or some of them look quite similar to storage heaters. So I've decided to narrow this down really to mainly focus on direct electric and storage, and some of what we would discuss there will apply equally to electric boilers and electric storage boilers as well. Infra-red systems, again, reasonably popular in some community buildings, and of course heat pumps, which are becoming more and more popular as we go. So we'll start off with oil and gas boilers. As I've already said, very, very popular solution. Yeah, the majority of the community buildings I do energy reports for tend to have some form of fossil fuel boilers. Gas can be on mains gas, or it could be a storage tank outside storing LPG. Again, mains gas tends to be cheaper than LPG. So if mains gas is present, you see mains gas. If the building is not on the gas main, then you tend to see LPG storage tanks outside. Heating oil is also stored in a tank, usually somewhere on the property, and is usually delivered by lorry to the properties. It's important to note with any fossil fuel system that there are many, many opportunities to increase efficiency and also to reduce carbon emissions. But there's only so much you can do, right? There will always be some carbon emissions connected to fossil fuel boilers. It's unavoidable. You're burning a fossil fuel, so there will be carbon emissions. So if for whatever reason a community building wants to stay on fossil fuels, maybe cost or other factors, the real critical piece is to make it as efficient as possible in order to reduce costs and also reduce emissions. But if we're looking at a net zero or a zero emissions future, we will have to transition away from using fossil fuels for heating community buildings. The image here is, I think this was the original gas boiler that King Arthur installed in Camelot. Very, very old model, very, very beat up model that I saw on a visit to a community building somewhere in Wales. I won't be any more specific than that. This boiler may have been sort of mid-80s efficient, if lucky, when it was new. In the state it's in now and in the age it's in now, it's probably, it might be 70% efficient. But a new gas boiler can be up to, well, I've seen some that are up to 95% efficient. 90 to 92 is fairly common. What this means in practice is that for every unit of gas that you use to generate heat in that property, 90-ish% will be used as usable heat in the building. And it's important to note that it isn't 100% efficient, because when we compare costs of different fuels, we have to compare the actual cost, not the unit cost. So if you pay 7 pence per kilowatt hour for gas and it's 90% efficient, the actual cost of delivered heat in your property is 7.78 pence per kilowatt. So 7 divided by 90 times 100. Obviously, if your gas boiler is very old, maybe a 70 to 75% efficient, the unit cost will be even more. In this example here, I use 70%. Yeah, then it would be 10 pence per kilowatt hour of delivered heat into your property. So the efficiency of the boiler is important, okay, and the age of the boiler will affect its efficiency. We tend to say with modern condensing boilers that it starts to lose its efficiency at about 10 years old, and the efficiency falls off a cliff at about 15 years old. So if it's older than 15%, it's likely losing a lot of its efficiency. And this can translate directly into the running costs of your building. In this example here, if you've got a heating bill of £2,000 per year, and you've got a very old 70% efficiency gas boiler, replacing that with a modern 90% efficient boiler would reduce your bills down to 1,555. And it would also, reduce your carbon emissions from that property by 23% as well. But do bear in mind, if you are putting in a new gas boiler into a community building, you're unlikely to change that for another 10 to 15 years. So you will be locking in your emissions from burning fossil fuels for 10 to 15 years as well. So if you are replacing a boiler, do consider other low carbon technologies as well, rather than just going for the default of changing the gas or oil boiler. Other ways we might increase the efficiency of any fossil fuel system, and some of these also, to be fair, do apply to other heating systems as well, not just fossil fuel ones. But we could change the controls. We usually sort of have a ballpark figure of reducing bills by up to 10% by putting in sort of smart controls that have a better understanding of how your building is sort of loses heat and sort of puts heat into a building. These tend to sort of have lower run times for heating up the building and for keeping it warm as you go on. Also, if you've got an app that you can sort of program the thermostats or turn heating on and off as you go, we tend to find people leave the heat, they don't forget to turn the heat off, or they program it sort of more effectively than the old manual controls where you have to have a manual with you at all points to sort of work it out. There are a few other technologies. Boiler deaerators are one of them, and destratification fans. These can also reduce your annual energy bills by 5 to 10% in some cases. Destratification fans are used in buildings with very, very high ceilings, maybe old churches, and they sort of mix the different layers of heat in the building. And boiler deaerators reduce oxygen and sort of bubbles from within the heating system and make the heating system itself more efficient. Boiler deaerators do tend to get installed with new boilers, though. They don't tend to be installed as a way to sort of, short-term reduce your costs on old boilers. And of course, insulating your buildings, and other things can also help reduce bills as well. But once you've done all of that, whatever your result, your fossil fuel uses after doing all of these things, that will always be there. The emissions then won't sort of reduce over time. What's left is stuff that you can't avoid, really. So switching to electric heating. Again, as I've mentioned, there are many, many different types of electric heating, but they broadly fall into three distinct categories. Direct electric heating, which is sort of panel electric heaters on the wall. You turn them on, they take a while to warm up, and then they slowly bring heat into the properties. Storage heaters, which tend to be sort of big, chunky radiators. Quite often they're filled with bricks. And then what tends to happen is if you're on an economy 7 tariff, the elements are sort of turned on when you're on off-peak electricity. The heat is stored in the bricks, and then over the course of the day, as you're using the building, the heat is released into the property. So the idea is that you're storing cheaper rates electricity in these storage bricks that you then emit into the property during the course of the day. And then the last one is radiant heating, which are things like infra-red heating panels. We'll deal with those separately, though, in another section of this presentation. So just to look at a couple of photos. So these are just your standard electric panel heaters. There's a sort of a towel rail there, or a panel heater that you might use in a property. And again, these will take a while to heat up. And then once they're hot, will take a while to circulate heat around the properties. So your community building might have to turn its electric heating on an hour, 2 hours, sometimes longer before whatever event is going to happen, because it'll take a while to heat the building up. Similarly, storage heaters tend to be larger, take up a bit more space. They're usually filled with some form of energy storage medium, which can be as simple as a brick. And then the heat is stored in those bricks. The units then sort of has some insulation wrapping around it. And then as you need the heat, there's a fan that's basically circulates air through the bricks and into the property to start heating it up. So if we look at costs of electricity, It depends where you are in the country, depends which supplier you use, but typical rates we see today are about 28 to 34 pence per kilowatt hour during the day. If you have an economy 7 metre, 14 to 22p is what we typically see. We'll use 30 pence for day rates and 18 pence for night rates, just for our calculations in the rest of this presentation. So gas and oil boilers can be anywhere from 70 to 95% efficient. Electric heaters are 100% efficient. What that means is for every kilowatt of electricity you put in, you get 1 kilowatt of heat out. But electricity is much more expensive than gas. So I think in the previous example of gas, we had about 7.8 pence per kilowatt for gas. An electric heating using direct electric panel heaters would cost us 30 pence per kilowatt of delivered heat, which is just under 4 times the cost of a gas boiler. For storage heaters, we might pay 18 pence per kilowatt of delivered heat because once again it's 100% efficient, but again quite a bit higher than the 7.8 pence we'd pay for gas. Carbon emissions for electricity are 0.177 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hours. Sorry, that should be kilograms. I'll explain what that means in a bit. Infrared heating works slightly differently. There's many different types of infrared heaters. I'm sure the ones we're most familiar with are the sort of either the red ones or the gold ones that we typically see in old churches or old community buildings. There are also sort of panel heaters that look like the second image here. They look more like electric panel radiators, but they're typically put on roofs because we need them to sort of cover a larger area, and a roof is usually a good place to position it. Infrared is also 100% efficient, so it still costs 30 pence per kilowatt of delivered heat. It doesn't actually save you money while it's on. But the main benefit of infrared heating is that it's instant heat. So the moment you turn it on, you feel warm, okay? So with electric heaters, we have to turn them on and they take a while to heat up. And then once they're hot, they take a while to actually distribute that heat through the property. So if you have a community building that takes 2 or 3 hours to heat up, you've got to run and pay 30 pence per kilowatt hour for every kilowatt of electric heaters in the property just to get the building warm. And then you have to continue keeping them on while the building's being used to keep them at that temperature. With infrared heaters, you switch them on, it's instantly warm. The moment you stop, you turn them off, and it instantly stops. The building feels cold again. So it's actually the warm-up time is where you save money with infrared heating. If you don't have to have it on for a few hours to heat the building up, that's money you're saving, okay? So infrared heating really is a best matched with community buildings that are used rarely. Because if you've got a community building that's maybe used 3 or 4 times a week, what you don't want to be doing is heating up, having that 2 or 3 hour warm-up period before the event happens. The event happens, you turn it off, and then by the next day, the building's cold again, and you've got to go through that process of warming it up again. Infrared heating is a really good match for those sorts of, buildings that are infrequently used. Because you literally walk in the building, switch it on, you're all warm, the meeting ends, switch the heating system off, walk out, and you're done. If a building has high occupancy, I tend to think that infrared heating is a bad match for that building. Because if you've got a building that's used 9 to 5, and you're paying 30 pence per kilowatt hour, and you've got 20 kilowatts of electric heating there, we can just do some rough maths there. £6 an hour for 8 hours, that's going to be an expensive heating system. There are sort of better ways of reducing running costs in those sorts of properties. Carbon emissions from infrared look quite similar to electric heating. And again, the carbon emissions you save is based on not having to run it for as long. Otherwise, it's still 0.177 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour you use. I am going to have time for questions at the end, by the way. But if you've got something really burning, please put your hand up. But yeah, otherwise, save the questions for the end. So heat pumps are another sort of option that's becoming more and more popular. Every single person on this call has a heat pump in their house. Some of you might have multiple heat pumps on your house. So the refrigerator in your house is a heat pump. Okay, if you've got a car that's lucky enough to have cold air blowing in the summer, you also have a heat pump in your car, and some of you might have a heat pump in your house that provides heating and cooling as well. So the technology is actually reasonably, mature, reasonably old. Been using refrigeration since for over 100 years. How heat pumps actually work is the refrigeration cycle that we see here. It's somewhat complicated, but I'll have a go at explaining how this works. So you've got on the blue side, that might be outside of your property. Whatever the outside temperature is, it's blown through a heating coil, a coil that has fluid running through it, and that raises the temperature of that fluid to whatever the temperature is outside. Let's assume it's 0 degrees outside. Okay, so it's sort of slightly odd to think about raising something up to 0, but when we get to the end of this, you'll understand how that works. So we raise the temperature up to 0. That fluid then goes through a compressor, which puts it under pressure. And so this is where a heat pump uses electricity to drive the compressor. When you push anything, squeeze anything into a smaller space, the molecules are closer together and it raises the temperature up. So let's say, for argument's sake, that it raises the temperature of that up from 0 to 35 degrees, okay, just by compressing it really, really hard. This then passes through the red side of this diagram, where you have another heat exchanger that takes 7 degrees of that heat out and distributes it around the property. It's now reduced the temperature of that fluid down to 28 degrees. Then it goes through a pressure release valve or an expansion valve, which releases all the pressure, and that will reduce that down to -7 degrees centigrade. Okay, because you never lose heat. You've compressed it from 0 to 35. You've added 35 degrees by compressing it. You'll lose 35 degrees of heat by decompressing it. So yeah, so you'll have it at -7. It then goes back through the blue side and raises the temperature back up to 0 again, and then it carries on and it goes round and round and round like this. And it's pulling 7 degrees of heat out every time it goes round the circuit. And then that heat is then put into the property. That's how a heat pump works on a technical level. The electricity you use in a heat pump is mainly to drive the compressor. Okay, the heat you generate is actually just heat you've moved from outside at 0 degrees into the property with, pushing in 7 degrees of that heat into the property. Running costs for heat pumps are more difficult to work out because it really depends on how well the system is set up. For every 1 unit of electricity use, you can get anywhere from 2 to 6 units of heat back out again into your property. And just to give you an example of this, a heat pump delivering 2 units of heat for every kilowatt hour you put in electricity would cost you 15 pence per kilowatt hour to run, which is again roughly twice the cost of a gas boiler. A heat pump delivering 6 units of heat for every unit you put in will cost you 5 pence per kilowatt hour of delivered heat, 50% less than the cost of running a gas system. So the question is, how do we make sure that a heat pump delivers more heat per unit of electricity used? How do we optimize and make a heat pump as efficient as possible? This is all to do with the flow temperature. So in that example I just gave you of a 35-degree flow temperature, taking 7 degrees of that heat out and distributing it out the property, you might get 4.3 units of heat at a flow temperature of 35 on sort of common heat pumps that we use today. The problem is most of our properties have heating systems that are optimized for oil and gas boilers. So the radiators in your community building might be tuned, if you like, for a flow rate of 50 degrees. Now, at a flow rate of 50 degrees, you might only get 3 units of heat for every 1 of electricity. And the reason why is to put pressure on that fluid to get it from 0 up to 35, you have to use a certain amount of electricity. To get it up to 50, you have to compress it more, which means you use more electricity to get it up to a higher flow temperature. If you're very unlucky and you have a very, very poor radiator system that requires a flow temperature of 70, you'd have to put even more electrical energy in. But you're still only pulling 7 degrees of heat out every time it goes around the radiators. So a higher flow temperature means lower efficiency. And so to really make the most of a heat pump, you need very, very large radiators that can deliver heat at a very low flow temperature. New radiators, therefore, usually go hand in hand with putting a heat pump system in. Underfloor systems also work brilliantly with heat pumps because if you think about it, the larger the radiator, the lower the flow temperature. Well, there's no larger radiator than the entire floor area of your community building. So underfloor systems are a great match for heat pumps for that reason. And then the final piece of the puzzle with heat pumps is weather compensation. What this does is there's a thermostat in the unit outside of your community building. There's a thermostat inside, and it measures the difference in temperature. And then it varies the flow temperature based on the difference between outside and inside. So on a reasonably warm winter's day, you might sort of run at a flow temperature of 25 or even 30 degrees. Whereas when it goes a bit colder, it might increase that up to 40 or 45. So it sort of it varies the flow rates and then gets used as maximum efficiency over the course of a year. And it's surprising how many heat pump installers don't enable weather compensation, unfortunately. It's a fairly critical feature with heat pumps. Again, heat pumps use electricity as their main source of power. But again, it's to do with the efficiency of the heat pump is how we work out the actual emissions of the heat pump. So if electricity from the grid has emissions of 0.177 kilograms of CO2 per kilowatt hour of electricity, and the heat pump has a coefficient of performance, which is how much heat it delivers for every unit of electricity of 2, then the emissions will be 0.089 kilograms. Similarly, if a heat pump has a coefficient of performance of 6, the emissions will be 0.03. So the more efficient the heat pump, the lower the carbon emissions will be. I would say, as a general rule, coefficient of performance from a good quality installer who knows how to install heat pumps, 3.5 is achievable fairly easily. Good installers, you should be expecting to hit 4.5. 6 is achievable, and I have seen a heat pump running at a coefficient of performance of slightly over 6, but it is rare, and it depends on your building being like absolutely perfect for that particular heat pump, the emitters being installed perfectly, the control system being controlled perfectly. It's not something I would expect to see sort of every single time you install a heat pump. But I would say 3.5 is a good minimum. 4.5 is a good target to use with heat pumps. There is one last type of heat pump that I want to just mention because I think it's a particularly good match for some community buildings. The picture on the right is what we've been discussing up to now, which is an air-to-water heat pump. Okay, you've got a heat pump outside, and then it generates hot water, then it distributes around your property, so it can heat up a hot water cylinder. It can maybe drive radiators and an underfloor system. And these are the types of heat pumps we've been discussing up to now. But there is another type of heat pump called an air-to-air heat pumps. We sometimes call these air conditioning units. And what these do is they take heat from outside and they use it to blow hot, or in some cases cold air into your property. They can't generate hot water, unfortunately, which means they're not a great match for residential properties, which usually has a reasonably high domestic hot water demand. But I haven't seen many community buildings with a hot water cylinder. I tend to see community buildings more with direct electric heating, which are the instant hot water heaters you see in the sinks. And so an air-to-air heat pump can be a good match for community buildings. Some units look like this. So you still have an outside unit, but they tend to be slightly smaller than the sort of heat pumps you would see on residential properties. And then inside the image on the right, you have wall units that blow hot or cold air into the property. Or sometimes I've seen properties with dropped ceilings with those sort of grid tiles, where they put sort of these square things with fan vents that blow hot or cold air into the property through those. One reason I like air-to-air heat pumps is that it reduces a lot of the mistakes that installers can do. So whatever the air-to-air heat pump says is the coefficient of performance on the box, that's what you'll achieve. With an air-to-water heat pump, if it's installed very, very well, you'll achieve higher than what the box says. And if it's very, very poorly installed, you'll achieve less. With an air-to-air heat pump, whatever it says on the box is what you should see in practice. A normal heat pump, an air-to-water heat pump, also tends to work best with low levels of heat distributed over a long period of time, which is quite often a bad match for some community buildings that are used very infrequently. So again, my example of a property being used 3 or 4 times a week, you don't want to be heating up the whole building for the whole week to get higher efficiencies, in a building that's used that infrequently. Whereas an air-to-air heat pump can actually pump out a lot of heat in a short amount of time into the property. So again, a good match for more infrequently used properties. You'll definitely get higher efficiencies with an air-to-water heat pump, but not massively more. And so I tend to recommend air-to-water heat pumps for buildings that I use more often, and air-to-air heat pumps for buildings that are used more infrequently. The other thing to note is that air-to-air heat pumps, also called air conditioning systems, can cool in the summer. So if you've got a building that's prone to overheating problems, again, an air-to-air heat pump can be a good match for that as well. So just to finish off, I want to do a comparison of a few different heating types for a specific community building. This particular community building, which I've entirely invented, has an annual heat demand of 10,000 kilowatt hours of heat. We're going to use 8 pence per kilowatt for gas, 12 pence for LPG, and 7 pence per kilowatt hour for oil. And we'll use a boiler of an efficiency of 90%. So a fairly modern new boiler. 30 pence for daytime electricity costs, 18 pence for off-peak. No efficiency upgrades. We're not going to worry about any of that. This is just comparing the running costs and the carbon emissions of these different technologies. The heat pump will have an efficiency of 4. So 4 units of heat for every 1 of electricity you put in. And it'll have a 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. occupancy every day with a 1.5 hour heat up time. This will help us work out the potential savings from an infrared system on this building. So these are the results. So gas, LPG and oil will use more than 10,000 kilowatt hours of heating because they're not 100% efficient. So we need more units of gas in order to generate 10,000 units of heat. Direct electric and storage heaters are 100% efficient. Infrared heaters are also 100% efficient, but I'm factoring in a 30% reduction because we don't have to have that 1.5 hour heating up time to get the building up to its temperature. A heat pump has a coefficient of performance of 4, so it needs 2,500 kilowatt hours of electricity. So we can see the relative running costs in the total cost column. Gas and oil and heat pumps are by far the cheapest forms of heating this building. Electricity, direct electric, is by far the most expensive, with infrared heatings being the second most expensive, and then storage heaters being sort of, somewhere in the middle there. LPG, obviously, the extra cost there is in LPG tends to be a little bit more expensive than mains gas. They have to deliver it on a lorry, and there's sort of extra costs associated with it. You might hire the tank and all that sort of stuff. So, that's where the extra costs come there. But in the column on the right, we can see the carbon emission figures for these. These are based on UK government carbon conversion factors, and we can see that by far the lowest carbon emissions comes from the heat pumps, with the electricity solutions being next. The fossil fuel options are obviously the highest in this particular example. Now, what happens if the heat pump isn't 400% efficient? What if it's only 200% efficient? Well, the costs then will jump up to 1,500 a year, obviously. Similarly, if the gas, LPG or oil boiler is older and only 70% efficient, that's going to add another £300 or £400 to the costs of those as well. So it's all important to sort of consider all of that within the running cost of this. These are sort of ideal, new installations installed to a reasonably high level of quality. These might not accurately reflect what an older system or a system installed 5 or 10 years ago, in the case of heat pumps, might be achieving in your community buildings today. That's my presentation. I think I might just leave that on there, just in case any questions come up here. So this is now just an open time for any discussions or questions, or any thoughts at all about the presentation so far. Hi, David. Thank you.
Hi, Elfed, and Elfed, you came to Weinbauer, blimey, about 18 months ago, I think it was.
I remember, yeah.
But what you don't remember was, so we were putting an application to move to the heat pumps. You gave us 2 options, and then the second boiler essentially blew up. Right. And so we had to replace like with like, because we weren't. So it was unfortunately, it was a little bit of a problem, a bit of a problem. But so from that work you did, I mean, the one thing that struck me was the air to air. I think, did you say? I think you put it into, was it Trausfuned? Yes. When the house. So there, because the advantage to me of the air to air, which is quite interesting, is obviously it sort of circumvents having to replace all the radiators. Yeah. And, I mean, they're obviously a little bit redundant. But you're finding from different places that they're working well? Yeah, absolutely. I'd have to caveat that by saying all of the ones I've installed, we've also installed some internal wall insulation. Okay. So yeah, I have some contacts who have installed them in sort of existing buildings and not really done much at all to them. But if you were interested in talking to someone who'd done that, I can probably find someone for you to discuss it with. What I like about air-to-air heat pumps is, as you said, you don't have to rip out your existing heating system. But similarly, you can keep the system that you've just put in, the gas boiler. Any sort of electric heating like an air-to-air heat pump can also sort of match well with if you're putting solar panels on the roof. So what you could do is you might have a cold winter's day with not a cloud in the sky. You might actually be generating a reasonable amount of solar that day. And so you could have the air-to-air heat pumps come on and heat the building using electricity that you're generating yourself. And then for those times when there is, it's a cold winter's day, and as we more commonly see, it's very, very cloudy and very miserable, and you're not generating any electricity, there's nothing stopping you then just turning on the regular gas boiler. So that's another way of reducing your overall emissions over the course of a year, by sort of making use of solar power to sort of drive a heat pump. If you went for an air to water heat pump, obviously you'd have to take out that gas boiler that you've only just purchased and put a heat pump in its place. Yeah, I mean, it is sort of possible to have a hybrid system, but yeah, that's what you more typically see. But yeah, an air-to-air heat pump could sort of sit alongside your current heating solution. And again, in the summer, when it's really, really hot, if you have solar panels, it's free cooling as well. Oh, you're on mute. Sorry. Yeah.
Can I ask a second question?
Of course. Yeah.
So, given where we are, and we've just done some fabric improvements, some new windows, so that's good. But I was interested in what you're saying. We don't really have very good controllability. So we have essentially two buildings, which are so two boilers. And at the moment, it's sort of thermostat, and so we have three thermostats. One building has upstairs and downstairs, a bowling club and a snooker club. So they've got their own little zones. We've got two microcontrollers and whatever. And then there's the bigger hall with a big hall and where the nursery is. But it would be. But it sounds to me that we could be a little bit smarter by having better controllers, perhaps app control that can phase in, so we're controlling the heating within the building at the different times, which is something that can be done.
Yeah, it can work very well. So with more sort of smart controllers, what it'll do is it takes a while to learn about your building, but you might sort of estimate that it takes you a couple of hours to heat your building up, and that might be true on the coldest day of the year. But you might be still switching the heating on 2 hours before the event is due, even when it's 7 or 8 or 9 degrees outside. So that's all heat that you're wasting essentially. So a smart thermostat will learn how long it takes your building to heat up, at a given sort of outside temperature, and so it'll work out exactly what it needs to do. It's 7 or 8 degrees, or it'll put the heating on 37.5 minutes before the event's due to start. Or if it's 0 outside, it'll an hour and 35 minutes. So it's sort of more intelligent about how when exactly it puts the heating on to get your building up to temperature, and so it can save a significant amount of energy by doing that. And then the other one is, my dad used to be a custodian of a small community building. And inevitably, the heating got turned on when he was available to go into the building to turn it on. And that could have been 5 hours before the event was due. But if he happened to be going out for dinner or doing something else, it was on that whole time just to make sure the building was warm for the people using the space. With smart controls, you have an app on your phone. So even if someone calls you last minute wanting to use the space and you haven't got a schedule created for them, you can literally just go in and turn it on and tell it to be warm by 7 o'clock. So all of these things can add up to significant savings. We do use 10% when we sort of recommend smart controls. So if you work out what your annual heating bill is and, whatever 10% of that is, if the heating controls cost you, £300-400 to go in, if you're going to pay that back in year 1 or in 2 or 3 years, it's well worth doing. The other one is I did some work for a bunch of chapels, which took like 8 or 9 hours to heat up. And I in one of them, and I really remember this, there was a really elderly gentleman in his late 70s, and he'd walk to the chapel like freezing rain, sort of frost covering the path, to get in there to turn the heating on to be ready for the afternoon service. And I just thought, God, I wish I could just give this man an app and he could just do it from his house. All of those things. I'm a big fan of smart controls. I think they can save energy. They can be much more convenient as well. Yeah.
How much are they, Albert?
It depends on the complexity of your system. So for a single, smart thermostat, you can buy them £150 to £200. Obviously, you need an electrician to come in and install them. If you've got multiple zones and you need multiple thermostats, then you multiply that by the number of zones that you have, obviously. Yeah, so it all depends on the complexity of your system. I would say just knowing your building, I would probably budget maybe 1,000 to 1,500. So compare that to the running costs of your building. So if it's going to take you 10 years to pay back, maybe it's not worth it so much. Or the other thing you could do is if you've got a space that's used particularly often, put a smart thermostat controlling just that zone. Wait for that to pay for itself, and then install a smart thermostat in another zone. Yeah, there's multiple ways you can do it.
Hi, Alvin. I'm working with a group at the moment that they've replaced their boiler. They had an oil boiler, and they've replaced it completely with a air source heat pump. So they've got a air to water heat pump.
Yeah.
Now they've been, because I'm looking at your costs down there, and they've been told that they need to leave it on 24 hours a day.
Yeah.
To keep it's the best way to operate, the most efficient way to operate the heat pump. Whereas with a lot of the costs you've got in that, I would assume with gas and LPG and oil, you can actually turn the boiler off at night, so you can you almost potentially incur nearly twice as much because you're running it 24 hours a day. Is that correct?
It is somewhat correct. It does depend on the usage pattern of the building. So I think an air-to-water heat pump is a bad match for a building that's used very infrequently. If you're using it over the course of the day, so it's used 9 to 5, say, or maybe even used in the evening as well, and you're leaving it on 24 hours, the increased efficiency you get from doing that means you still only have to put 10,000 kilowatts in, but you're delivering different heat. You're delivering a very, very low background level of heat all the time. And that's how you get the efficiencies up. So yeah, the simple answer is it might be the right thing, but it really depends on the occupancy of the building. I would say if it's used infrequently, that's a really bad control strategy. And it might also unfortunately mean it's they were badly recommended in there to water heat pump.
The other question I've got, which is something you haven't covered, and by the way, love the presentation, was the implication of hot water. The same organisation, they are now heating their hot water. Now, what is the best way to heat the hot water? Is it to leave the heat pump running and turn the immersion heater off, or to use the immersion heater to run basically run the storage tank? I think that there seems to be a big issue in terms of cost and electricity consumption in that area. And I guess what's the implication of trying to heat a very large hot water tank for showers and baths when you've got several people in the house and you want to do it relatively quickly when you've got relatively cold water coming out of the heat pump because it's a lot lower than you would from a normal boiler?
Yeah. So the simple answer is it's always best to use the heat pump, because even if you have to heat up the cylinder to 50 or 60 degrees, you're still going to get a coefficient of performance of 2. Right. So the actual heat you're delivering into the cylinder, okay, it's costing you 15 pence per kilowatt, but that's still half the price of using an immersion heater, which is direct electric. The only thing is with the heat pump is some types of heat pumps sometimes struggle to get up to 60 degrees. So usually with a hot water cylinder, you might want to set the set point temperature for the cylinder to be 45 to 50 degrees. And then once a week or once, whatever the building regulations recommendations is, you use the immersion heater to bring it up to 60 as part of the Legionella cycle, just to sort of remove, get it up and kill any bacteria in the hot water cylinder. That's usually the most efficient way of doing it. But that's a controls question. Really, the installer should have worked that out and told them what the best way to do this is. Did they get any sort of instructions or?
Right. Well, actually, they've been back to the installer, and the installer says it's all been installed properly, and they're refusing to come back to site. And they didn't leave they left very little paperwork. Which I think is the problem.
It's very common these days, unfortunately.
You have more knowledge on board, do you, when you're doing it?
The difference between a well-installed heat pump and a badly installed one is dramatic. And it's very frustrating because, how do people know where to go for a good heat pump install? In some parts of the country, I'm a big fan of something called is-goch. And it's a website, and they also sort of design and install heat pumps. And they will give you a guaranteed level of performance. So they might sort of, say, if you pay a certain amount, they'll guarantee a performance of 3.5. If you pay a little bit more, they might guarantee a performance of 4.5. And their installers are really good. They do the design, and then they subcontract to sort of smaller local firms. But those local firms have to go through their training. That's the best recommendation I've given to them, because it can be a bit of a wild west with heat pump installs, unfortunately.
And what's your thought on keeping the original boiler and just using that when it's really cold, like, for example, below zero outside?
Yeah, you can do.
Using heat pump for all the rest of the year.
Yeah, you can do. The problem with that is there's a £7,500 government grant towards the cost of a heat pump, but that's contingent on you removing the old heating system.
Okay.
So if you keep the old gas boiler, you can have the £7,500, unfortunately.
Wow.
But that grant doesn't always apply. So in some cases, for community buildings with very high heat demand, above a certain threshold, you don't get that grant anyway. So in those cases, you might as well keep the oil or gas boiler and do exactly as you said. And also that grant does not apply for air-to-air heat pumps. It doesn't apply to them at all. Air-to-air heat pumps are much cheaper than air-to-water heat pumps. I paid £4,000 for the 10 kilowatt system in that chapel in Traws that David mentioned earlier. I'm reasonably confident that an air-to-water system would have been 10 to 12 for that property. So in some ways, you don't need the grant on an air-to-air system. But bear in mind, an air-to-air system won't quite get the efficiency of an air-to-water heater. So in a community building that's got high occupancy, an air-to-water heat pump is a better solution, I think.
Thank you. That was excellent.
Thanks, Keith. Thanks. Sorry, Sheridan, was that your hand up? Or? Oh, you're on mute. You're on mute. Still on mute. There should be a button somewhere, like a picture of a microphone, Sheridan, and then you should be able to click it and it should come off. Or if we can't manage it, yeah, there you go.
How is that?
Yeah, that's good, thanks.
Right. Thanks. I'm very new to Egan and what's going on, and I need to set up a Zoom with John Cantor, so Henny informs me.
Yeah.
We got a very inefficient system, we think, Elved. I think they've designated a single flow system,
right,
which feeds 25 radiators from our combi boiler.
Yeah.
And they've recommended that we zone it, because at the moment we're having to heat. We only use the building twice a week for choir practice, and we're having to heat the building for 9 hours to get it up to anywhere near a comfortable heat.
Yeah.
Now, they've recommended that we install thermostatic radiator valves, but I'm just wondering. We are an energy audit. That's where we getting our information from, and I'm just wondering whether it's worth our while putting these thermostatic valves on the existing radiators, or is it better, would you think, for us to change the system from this single flow system?
Yeah, that's a very difficult question to answer. I think I've actually have had exchanged an email with you about this, but
yes, you have. Yeah,
I've been a bit snowed under, so I haven't actually answered you yet. So thermostatic radiator valves basically are they turn the radiator on or off based on the temperature in the room, right? So you can also program them to sort of
only some radiators go up, or some radiators warm up less or more than other ones. So they do help you in terms of controlling the heat in a building. But really, what you don't want to be doing is heating the whole building, right?
No.
So where they work best is if you can somehow divide the building up. So maybe you've got one room where the choir sort of does their practicing, and you use TRVs to basically just heat that space and not the rest of the building. So you can use it as a form of zoning, the very, very smartest ones.
Yes.
But you still need a way of sort of stopping that heat moving around the building. So if you've got, maybe it's an old chapel or something, there's one massive space.
Yeah.
You unfortunately, you're going to have to heat up the whole space for it to feel warm. If you've got a massive space that you've divided into 3, and you essentially want to make them into 3 separate zones, then that's something you could achieve either by setting up a zonal system, or you could sort of manage that with TRVs as well.
Right.
So it depends. Sorry, it is a little bit complex. Describe your building to me again, Sheridan. Is it one large space, or is it lots of rooms?
It's an old church hall. It's got 2 floors.
Yeah.
And upstairs, got 25 heat radiators, 14 of which are on the first floor. Below that, they're running, and there's no one there.
Yeah.
They're running in the downstairs toilets, downstairs hallway. And so when we heat the building, we're having to heat everything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you can go downstairs to the toilet and be very warm, or go upstairs to the main hall and be freezing.
Yeah. Right. And do you do that just to stop like freezing in the bathrooms, or?
Primarily, we downstairs is our archive rooms, and we keep all our old uniforms. So we're trying to keep the building as dry as we possibly can.
Yeah, makes sense.
It makes sense, but it's expensive.
It is, yeah.
So, do you think we need? Do you think we'd need to change? Because I'm saying it's a single flow. Basically, how he explained it to me was it's like a chain reaction. The heat does heat. Once one heats, the next radiator heats, and so on and so on and so on.
Yeah.
Would it be better for us to change the whole system so it's not a single flow?
Yeah, it's sort of, but it does sound like you've got sort of a zonal system, because you said it's cold upstairs even though it's warm downstairs. But is the radiators running everywhere, but it's still cold upstairs? And setting up some sort of zonal system where you can control where gets heated when probably does make sense.
Okay.
I always also think if you've got a space that's heated permanently, which is what it sort of sounds like the basement is, it's very difficult to give advice without having seen it. But if there's anything you can do to reduce heat losses from the basement, like maybe insulation at the roof level to stop, heat escaping up into the rest of the building, or maybe wall insulation, but you've got to be very careful with that in the basement. But something like that might be possible, so that you're keeping that heat in and you don't have to have it on all the, as much in the bits that you are heating. And then you want some way of rapidly heating the upstairs, because it sort of sounds like you've got to put it on for a long, long time for it upstairs to get up to temperature.
That's right.
So I sort of wonder whether you might need more radiators upstairs. Maybe insulate and reduce heat losses downstairs, move some of those radiators upstairs so that you've got more heat emitters upstairs, and then splitting it off into separate zones so that you're not heating the whole building all of the time. That's sort of roughly what I'd be looking at. But like I said, it's really difficult to give you specific advice without having been and had a look, if that makes sense.
No, it makes a lot of sense. John's offering to do a Zoom with me sometime when I'm making an arrangement.
Yeah, brilliant.
And maybe we can get John, because John lives in Midwest, doesn't he?
Machynllath, I believe.
Yeah. Fair old way down.
But
we'll see. We'll see. But I mean, the advice you've given us so far has been great. But do you know the final question from you? Know the infrared heaters? Well, one of our choristers is with a chapel, and they've brought over their heaters, which are okay. If we're only going to use it twice a week, is it better for us to use the infrared heaters?
Potentially, potentially, because instead of running it the whole time, you know, you could, again, if you insulated the bottom floor, kept the heat in there so it doesn't escape out. And then with infrared, as I said, you switch the thing on, you feel warm, as long as you're in line of sight of the infrared panel. So even though they use quite a lot of energy, because you only need them for that hour or 2 hours where you practice, they can work quite well.
Okay.
If I had a building that I was using twice a week, I would probably seriously consider infrared.
Would you? Okay.
I would,
Thanks, Alan. That's great.
Problem. Thanks for the question. Do we have any other questions?
You're at 2 o'clock now, so
yeah, I was just thinking that.
Yeah, Matt's had to leave, so
Okay.
Stop the recording. I'll stop the recording now.
Great, thank you.